All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting in-depth review. For those of you wondering, where's the videos for this week? Still having issues getting guests for D&D to deep dive. So instead of giving you nothing this week, we're doing. Not only are we doing an in-depth review, we are doing an in-depth review of something I have been super excited about for a while. This is going to be an in-depth review of Avatar Legends, the role-playing game, the full thing. Now, quick point of clarification, this is in no way connected to the people that actually make Avatar Legends, the role-playing game. I'm not affiliated with Magpie Games. This is not sponsored. Nothing like that. I am simply, I backed it on Kickstarter. I got my PDF copy of it, and I'm doing a review for you. But I do want to emphasize this is in no way connected with them in any way, shape, or form. They did not give me a special copy, anything like that. This is all from me. That being said, as I mentioned before, I kickstarted this. I'm a huge fan of Avatar: The Last Airbender. I'm less of a fan of Legend of Korra. I don't think it was quite as good as The Last Airbender, but the first two seasons are amazing. And then the third season was interesting, and the fourth season was just not great. But anyway, yeah, so I kickstarted this, and it is going to be coming out relatively soon. This will be kind of a unique in-depth review, mostly because this is not out yet. From everything I have been able to glean and read, it should be out this year. I think what I have heard in places is sometime in like Q3, Q4-ish. So effectively, sometime probably after September-ish, if you're not familiar with how quarters work as far as release schedules and things like that. Sometime after September. I don't have an exact date, but I am so excited about this that I wanted to do the in-depth review, and because I couldn't make another video this week, I thought this would be a perfect chance for it. So, for anyone that is new to my in-depth reviews, this is an in-depth review. I go through every single chapter. I talk about the things I like about it, the things I don't like, the things I think they did very well, the things that I think they did poorly. I will give, suggestions on where they could improve if they make another book or something like that. It is very in-depth. These generally run anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours. So a lot of people are just coming in here to get an idea of whether or not I should get it. So the first part of my review is always, should you buy this? Now, there's a small caveat to this. You can't buy this yet. But you will be able to buy it relatively soon. I don't know what the price point is going to be. I know what I backed it as, or at least I used to know. I don't remember anymore. I think it was $75. It was either $75 or $95. There was a 5 in it. And that got me a lot more than the core rulebook, and that was the Kickstarter thing. I don't know what the price point of this is going to be. There will be a link in the description below to the actual website for this. So any announcements and anything like that will be there. So normally I say, is this worth blah, blah. I don't know what it's going to be worth. So take that with a grain of salt. But how I do my should I buy this section. I generally consider 3 different groups of people are going to be buying core books for RPGs. They are players, GMs, and what I call lore hounds. Players are exactly that. They're people that generally are going to be playing the game, but they're not really going to be sitting behind the GM's screen. They have a different set of needs and wants from a product than a GM does. Obviously, a GM is going to be someone that's going to be sitting behind the GM screen. And when I say GM, I mean anyone that's going to sit behind the GM screen, whether you are for forever GM like me or you are going to run one session, whatever, I consider you a GM, and you will have different needs than players. The third group of people is what I call lore hounds. Lore hounds are people that may never sit down and play a session as a player or as a GM. They just enjoy the subject matter. They enjoy the lore, the worlds that are created. One of the best things about RPGs is, compared to other things, like say books or television shows, the world only exists as long as the book is being read, or as long as you're watching the show. And that's all they ever have to create. However, for an RPG, they have to create an entire living, breathing world that can exist once that particular book is closed, so that people can tell their own stories in it. So for lorehounds, RPG books and core books tend to be really, really good to just learn a lot about a very living, well-developed world. So I separate this section into three groups. Let's get started with... Should I buy this? Players. If you are someone that wants to play in an Avatar Legends, the role-playing game, whether you want to do one-shots, whether you want to do a full campaign, do I think this book is worth purchasing? Well, it's a core book, and it is currently the only core book. They kickstarted, and they actually got expansions and other, they got stretch goals. So there's going to be more than just this single core book eventually when everything launches. But if you want to play Avatar Legends, you need to get this. Now, as far as the system itself, the system, I think, is remarkably robust. Something I didn't realize until I started doing the research I needed to do for this video is Avatar Legends is actually using the system from another game. That's not to say that everything it isn't in here isn't entirely unique. It is. It's remarkably difficult to tell that this is kind of an open source system, that they have taken the basic rules of it and created an entire role-playing system over. But that system is called Powered by the Apocalypse, and there's quite a few different games that use this as a system. Masks is one that I recently got that I thought was really cool. Obviously, Powered by the Apocalypse, I believe, is the name of the first game that used this underlying rule set. It's kind of akin to like the open game license or the Cypher system, where there's a lot of different games that all use the core rule structure and the mechanics of the Cypher system, but they make their own games. So this actually uses the Powered by the Apocalypse system. But like I said, nowhere in the book itself does it mention Powered by the Apocalypse at all, and I would not have known that it even existed had I not found another game that used the same moves and playbook system that I saw here, and I did a little bit of research. What that means is this is a very, very, very complete system. Now, a little addendum for players specifically. This is not a super crunchy system. And when I say a crunchy system, what I mean is something like, even like 5th edition did a Dungeons and Dragons, but if we go even crunchier to something like 3rd edition did a D&D, or Pathfinder, if you want to go super, super crunchy, to something like GURPS. Those have a lot of mechanics, there's a lot of numbers in them, there's a lot of rules. Avatar Legends is not a very mechanics heavy game. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have mechanics, but everything in the game is built around telling a story. And because of that, things like you will never play Avatar Legends using maps and miniatures. There's no real, like, you don't have a movement speed. You don't have, an action, a movement, and a bonus action. Everything is resolved either by using what are called moves, or if you're in combat, doing what are called exchanges. And an exchange isn't like in, did a D&D where it goes, well, I'm going to move up and I'm going to attack with my sword, or I'm going to attack with, my bow twice, or I'm going to cast a spell. Those are actions. An exchange or a move is effectively an entire group of actions that lead to an uncertain result. And that's what makes it a move. And so, Powered by the Apocalypse in general is built around this idea of moves. Anytime you are doing something that leads to an uncertainty of whether or not you're going to be able to complete it, you will use a move. And there are moves that are built into this system. There are moves that are kind of general moves that anyone can use. There are moves that you'll get in your playbook, which is effectively like your class. There are moves that are related to your fighting style. There are rules that are related to your techniques. Like, everything around this is kind of built around these idea of these different moves and these different things that you can do. But what it all boils down to is you basically describing, this is what I want to do. And then either you, the GM, or both of you will figure out which move fits best with that. There will be a roll, and depending on what you roll, you either succeed or fail. Sometimes the success or failure will have different steps. And then the story moves forward. It feels very similar to me to kind of how Open Legend is built. The idea of every roll is important, and no matter what happens, a roll is never going to be wasted. The story is always going to move on whenever you make a roll. The same is true here. Every time you use a move, the story is going to move on. That's the whole purpose of the move. So it's never going to be something like, oh, I tried to pick this lock and it didn't work. Okay, well, someone else wanted to try. No, the story moves forward because every time you fail at a move, there are consequences that move the story forward. So if you are someone that's really, really into kind of learning the system and learning how to kind of beat the system and really like kind of crunchy things, you may not really like this because this is very, very heavily narrative focused. However, if you are one of those people that really likes the idea of kind of narrative to telling and, you know, telling a really interesting story and the rules really existing to tell a more interesting story, then this might be right up your alley. The other thing that's kind of unique about this is campaigns in this are designed to be relatively short. What I mean by that is you don't start at level 1 and go up to level 20 or something like this. In this system, you have your playbook, and then you, depending on what happens in the narrative, you will have these growth questions you ask yourself at the end of what they call episodes. They kind of divide play into a bunch of different subdivisions. You have sessions, which is the actual gameplay session. An episode may be one or more sessions, and an episode is just like that, just like a television series. An episode of the series, it's a complete story in something. At the end of an episode, you'll ask these growth questions. If you answer yes to any of them, you get a growth point and you can do certain things. However, I think there's like 5 or 6 different ways your character can grow and improve, and each one of those things you can do twice throughout the entirety of that character. Once you've done that with your character, like I said, twice for each one of these things, your character is done growing. They don't get any more powerful. And again, this is meant to simulate what happens in Avatar: The Last Airbender or Legend of Korra, where you watch as these characters start off as kind of unsure, raw talent people, and they grow into who they are. They become much more confident. They become much more powerful. And then by the end of your season, which is the large subdivision, multiple episodes turn into a season. The end of your season, you may retire your character. It doesn't mean the whole campaign is done. You might bring in a new character, or that might be, okay, well, that was the story we told. Now we're going to tell a different story. You'll start a new campaign, effectively. So if all those things sound interesting to you, 100% pick this up as soon as it gets in. I think the system itself is really, really solid. Every time I read this system, I get excited. I want to run games in this system. I want to play games in this system. It looks so much fun. But this is a very, very narrative heavy system. Most of the things that they have in here are super, super generic. Like your moves. To give you an example of a move, I'm going to see core moves. Let's go there. To give you an example of a basic move that everyone can do, one of the basic moves is called Assess a Situation. Now, if you compare that to like a rogue ability to backstab is a very specific thing. You know, you go, you stab someone in the back. It's very specific. It is very specific. Assess a Situation is very open-ended. Guide and Comfort is another move that you can do. And that's how all the moves are named. They're very, very generic, and you basically get to fit in, well, I'm going to kind of Guide and Comfort, but I'm going to do it with my firebending. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to this person, and I'm going to just come over, and I've got a cup of water, and I'm going to heat it, and I'm going to put some lemon in it and some honey, and I'm going to give them a hot drink and talk to them. That's kind of how all the moves go. And there are some more specific ones that are specifically related to bending or things like that. But that's what this whole thing is made out of, is these moves and everything. And so, yeah. Final recommendation. When this comes out, if you're a player, should you buy it? Yes, with an asterisk. Yes, if you are okay with a very narrative-focused game. If you are someone that plays RPGs to build a really cool character, that you max out their stats and things like this, this system is going to feel very simplistic and open-ended to you. There is benefit from structure and limitations. I've talked about this with quite a few different people. The idea that limitations breed creativity when you allow them to, and when they're not too limiting. This is a very open-ended game. So if you really like limitations and working within things, this might not be your game. But even if you're not a huge fan of kind of narrative-based storytelling, the system itself is so solid, I have a hard time not recommending this to players. So the only caveat is, don't come into this looking for a really, really rules complex, crunchy game. This is not that kind of game. However, if you don't mind trying something new, if you've never done this before, if you don't mind a narrative, or you just want to kind of expand what you can do, pick this up. It's amazing. Moving on. I'm at 2 water bottles here, so I have to keep moving them around. Should I buy it? GMs. Obviously, GMs have a much different set of needs than players do. And I think one of my favorite things about this book, and it's something that I see a lot of other books kind of gloss over, is this book almost feels entirely designed for brand new players. And that's not a bad thing. It doesn't talk down to you or anything like that. It's very clearly organized so that people that are very, very familiar with how games, how to run games and things like that, can skip over the stuff that they don't generally need. But this book is so good at introducing every single step, and actually has so many, like chapter 8, it's called Running the Game. The entire chapter is all about how to GM this particular game. And it talks broadly about, how to be a GM, and that's put throughout this entire book. You have this kind of broad thing of this is how you GM. But chapter 8 specifically tells you how to deal with all the different really interesting aspects of this book. Chapter 9 is called Seasons and Campaigns, which teaches you how to build your own campaign if you want to do that. Chapter 10 is called Running Adventures, and the first 10 pages are actually about how to run adventures. I've talked about this before. In other books I've reviewed, they have a section that's called Running the Adventure, and what it should be labeled as is, here's an introductory adventure, run it. This isn't that. This actually tells you this is how you run an adventure in this system. And then the second 10 pages of this chapter are an actual adventure. And it is an incredibly effective way to teach someone how to GM. You tell them everything they need to know to do it, and then you give them the ability to do it. And they have all these wonderful ways to kind of explain how things work. Just everything about this book is so great and makes it so easy to just sit into the GM's chair and go for it. This book literally has everything you need to run a game. Not just if you already know how to GM. This is literally everything you need to sit down and run a game. If you've never in your life thought about GMing, this is probably one of the best books I have seen at introducing a new GM on how role-playing games work. This is one of the best books I've seen for introducing new players, specifically because it deals with probably the hardest part for any new role player to get, which is role-playing games are about telling a story. And that is the most difficult thing that a lot of new players and new GMs have to get around is, okay, well, they have all these rules, but what about, what do I do now? You know, that idea of, okay, you are in Baldur's Gate. Over there is the inn. Over there is the front gate of the city that you can go out and do whatever you want. What do you want to do? Well, what can I do? Anything. Narrative-based games like this are great for new players because it gets them into, and for new GMs, it gets them into the idea of, okay, this is how I can tell a compelling story. And so, yeah, for GMs, this is such, even if you're not a fan of Avatar, this is such a great introduction to how to GM. And even if you are an established GM, this is not a bad book to pick up to learn some new things. One of my favorite things about narrative-based RPGs is reading a new narrative-based RPG will always improve your storytelling abilities. Always. Every single time. Every time I found a new RPG that is more heavily narrative-based, even one-page RPGs. Simply running a one-page RPG, because most of them are very, very narrative based. They have so few mechanics, they have to be narrative based. Even just running a one-page RPG will improve your storytelling abilities because you don't have the mechanics to lean on to kind of give you that helping hand of, well, I don't know what to do. Well, the mechanics will, this is how fatigue works, so I don't have to really come up with a cool story about this. We'll just say that you have 2 levels of fatigue or something. So yeah, even if you are not interested in Avatar specifically, this is a great system to learn. And again, if you want to run other Powered by the Apocalypse games, this, again, I've read a couple other books. This is the best one that uses this system in just introducing you to how the system works, giving you everything you need to know what you need to focus on, what you don't need to focus on. I wish I had this before I ran my first Avatar Legends Quick Start, because so much of the stuff in here makes the stuff that I learned running the Quick Starts back in December, which you can actually see. I ran it on this channel. You can watch the entire game there. There's so much more here that makes it so easy. So, for GMs, do I recommend this? Hell yes. Even if you are not an Avatar fan, pick up this book. You will learn things. And if you don't want to play in Avatar, the system itself, like I said, is robust enough. If you want to just template it, you can make your own game, not having to use the world of Avatar, and just have people that can control 4 different elements, and then the other 2 fighting styles that you have are weapons and technology. So yes, basically dividing people into 6 different groups and tell whatever story you want to. This has enough there that you can do that pretty easily. So finally, the Lore Hounds. This is by far, by leaps and bounds, probably the greatest Lorehound book ever. If you are a Lorehound, if you are a sometimes Lorehound, if you are a player that really gets into lore, and you like Avatar, you've heard of Avatar the Last Airbender, not the blue people up in space, but the cartoon series. If you're interested in Eastern martial arts influenced fiction, if you're just interested in really interesting world building, this book has got it in spades. Oh my word. Chapter 2 is called The World of Avatar. It starts on page 15, ends on page 92. This entire chapter, by far, I think it is the longest chapter in the book by a huge margin. Even the playbooks, the actual class, the chapter that is entirely based around your classes and telling you how to use them, is only about 40 pages long. Chapter 2, The World of Avatar, is over double that. There is so much lore. This is the most lore complete book I have ever seen. Even if you go like Eberron Rising from the Last War was a really, really great kind of narrative lore kind of book because it explains so much of Eberron. It's got nothing on this. Like, oh my. It starts off with defining the 4 nations, which is the big driving force in this world. And then it talks about there are 5 different eras, 5 different time periods you can run games in this series. They are the Kyoshi era, the Roku era, the 100-Year War era, the Aang era, and the Korra era. Each one of these has very different geopolitical states. The Kyoshi era, Kyoshi was an avatar before even Roku. And Avatar The Last Airbender, the first cartoon series, is based around Aang, and that happens at the end of the 100 Years' War. So both the Kyoshi era and the Roku era are set before the television show starts, and the world is in an extremely different place. The 100 Years' War era, the first cartoon series happens in the last, I want to say, 3 years, or maybe it's only a year and a half or 2 years. It is the last tiny little portion of that era. So the 100 Years War era is literally an entire era that's about this huge conquest that lasts for 100 years. The Aang era is specifically that time period where Aang is happening. And then the Korra era is after that, where the world is recovering from 100-year conquest and everything that happened with Avatar Aang and everything. So each one of these eras has its own section that talks about the state of the world. Each one of the 4 bending nations has their own. All right, this is what the air nomads were doing during this period. This is what the Fire Nation was doing during this period. And in each one of those things, it has a little section about these are the potential conflicts that you might run into if you're telling a story in the air nomad that's dealing with air nomads, or if you're telling a story that's set in the Earth Nation. It's incredible. Or the Earth Kingdom. Fire Nation, Earth Kingdom, Water Tribes, Air Nomads. It is unbelievable how much lore is in here. I would be hard pressed to find a wiki that had this much lore. If you are a lore hound, you should be salivating at the idea of this book. It is that good. And every single section has lore built into it. The playbooks all have lore. The different techniques all have lore. The different bending styles, the different NP, like just everything in this book is just filled to the brim with lore. So even if you never want to play a game at all, do I recommend you pick up this book? Yes, 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 yeah, 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 yes, yeah, yes, 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 yes. I have never seen a book that is so has created such a complete world, and not just a complete world, 5 different time shifted versions of that world. There are 5 complete worlds inside this, because each one of those eras is a very different world state. And you can tell stories in every single one of them, and there's so much information in here. So, yes, final recommendation for Lorehounds, pick up this book. So, yes, that is the short part of the in-depth review. If you just came here to figure out if you want to pick this up when it comes out, or maybe you're watching this later on and it's already come out, those are my recommendations. Like I said, for players, yes, it is a recommendation with a small caveat of if you are someone that really, really enjoys crunchy systems, you may not enjoy this book. But if you're open to a narrative-focused system, you will love it. For GMs, not only is this a great book to be able to run this system, but this is a great introduction to GMing. If you've thought about GMing and you want to figure out how to get into it, but maybe running D&D or Pathfinder or something like that seems too imposing to you, pick this up. This is a great way, and it will prepare you for other systems as well. Finally, Lorehounds, pick up this book. It's amazing. There's so much in here. You can read this like a novel. It's that good. So, finally moving to the in-depth review. The in-depth review is exactly that. If you came for the recommendations, thank you so much for showing up. Remember to like, subscribe, turn notifications on in the comments down below. Tell me what it was that brought you to this video. I never really asked that, and I really should, because I'm always interested to find out how people find out about my videos, whether it shows up in YouTube, you found it on Twitter. Some dude said, oh, dude, you gotta watch this stuttering dude talk about Avatar for 2 hours. However you did that, let me know in the comments down below. So, the in-depth review. I'm going to go chapter by chapter. There will be chapters in the description. If you get bored or anything, you can skip around. You can come back and watch part of this now and come back later. It's why I put the chapters in. Makes it significantly easier to watch it in little pieces. I know that's not how I'm supposed to do it for YouTube, but it just makes sense to me. So, let's actually dive into this in-depth review. So, Chapter 1. Welcome to the game. Every RPG has a What Mean RPG section. This is probably one of the better ones I've read. And the reason why is the first thing that they do is this is welcome to the game, not welcome to RPGs. Most other ones, they'll say welcome to the game, but it's What Mean RPG. And the first thing they do is they talk about Avatar Legends, the game. Then they talk about the world itself you're going to be dealing with. And then they start talking about the role-playing aspect of it. And finally, after all of that, they say, what mean RPG? Or specifically, what is an RPG? This is something that has to be in every single book, because if you have new players, they're going to want to read what is an RPG. This one is, it's like every other one. It says, this is an RPG. It's really simple. However, as this is, like I said, a very, very different kind of game from something like a Cypher system game or Shadowrun or anything like that. This is going to feel very, very different compared to most other What is an RPG, because it's going to talk about how to play this system specifically, which is very, very narrative focused. Right after that, they go to the Avatarverse. They explain the 5 eras. And they explain kind of what each era represents. Like the Kyoshi era, to give you an example, play in the Kyoshi era if you want to fight in battles against rogues and bandits and deal with governmental corruption as the nations establish their borders. The Kyoshi era is really when the 4 nations are really starting to kind of come together. Instead of just like little groups of people, they start becoming actual nations, actual countries, actual, connected groups of people. Each one of the other eras has a little, one sentence pitch of, if this is the kind of game you're looking for, this is the era you want to play in. And I think that's really interesting, and it's something that isn't really done anywhere near enough in RPGs. Like D&D, if you read the 5th edition Player's Handbook, it's not really going to tell you, oh, by the way, if you want to play this kind of game, maybe you should look at this campaign setting or things like that. They don't really go into that, despite the fact that D&D games are very, very different. I run 2 D&D campaigns on Wednesday nights, on alternating Wednesdays. One of them is set in the Air Elemental Plane, my personal version of it, and they are effectively Firefly with magic. Like that's kind of how I pitched it to people. Firefly is steampunk Firefly with magic. That's what it is. The other one started off as a little more kind of your traditional fantasy, though it had vampires and werewolves and things. So it had a little gothic feel to it. And now it is full-blown kind of horror storytelling. And those 2 games are so vastly different. They use the exact same system. I haven't homebrewed massive amounts of stuff. I homebrewed the worlds. But that's about it. Like, we use the same rule system. And you can tell such different stories. So that's one of the things I really like about this era system, is it really helps you to kind of narrow down even more. Okay, what kind of experience do I want? Because I don't always want to play Lord of the Rings 400 times. Like if every single campaign I got into was this high fantasy, you're going to save the world from a great evil, it would get boring really, really fast. Sometimes I want to be able to get on my ship and, dock in a port and get into a bar fight. Sometimes I want to deal with, the entire world seems built to just make me suffer, and find a way to get through that suffering and show the world that little bit of light and hope. And so, yeah, I think this is a really, really great way to do that. And obviously the eras just keep showing up over and over and over again. The next section, they talk about the 4 nations. And this is the other thing that I like about this. Again, because it's very narrative based. The lore and the story that you're going to tell is very, very important in this game. So, getting the idea of like the nation you come from is going to shape how you interact with the world, whether you are in that nation or not. So understanding the 4 different nations is important. The next thing you talk about is the trainings. Training, the way that you create a character in this, we'll go over a little more detail when we actually get to the... really? Are you not gonna... There we go. We'll get into a little bit more when we actually get into how to create a character. But there are basically kind of 4 different things you have. You have your playbook, which is effectively your class, though saying that does not really do it justice. On top of that, you have what's called your training. Your training is basically how you do things. Your playbook is your story. That is your own personal story, and the playbooks are specifically designed to kind of guide you there. The trainings are how you interact with the world. There are 6 total trainings. You have waterbending, earthbending, firebending, airbending, weapons, and technology. and they are built entirely around the idea of this is how you interact with the world. And so this section where they explain the various trainings is basically to kind of give you an idea. If you're going to be a waterbender, this is kind of how you're going to see the world. This is how you're going to interpret how you interact with the things. And it's rooted in the lore of the world itself, where, like, to give you an example, for waterbending, water is movement, change, and grace. The element cannot be broken, and even in its most rigid forms, has the ability to melt and reform. It is a dynamic element, subtle but powerful. Waterbending is inspired by the real world martial art Tai Chi. This style's flowing motions allow a waterbender to use their element defensively to redirect an opponent's attack, or offensively in the form of water whips, ice attacks, and large waves. Certain waterbenders can also redirect energy paths in the body to heal injuries. So it's giving you this idea of kind of lore and mechanics built into one. The other thing I really liked about Avatar in general, the cartoon series, all of the different bending styles are actually based on real martial arts. Some of those I've studied. I've actually studied a little bit of Tai Chi. I never learned a ton of it, but I started studying it a few years ago to try and help with my anxiety. You can see how well that worked. Would have been better if I had a teacher. Let's put it that way. Waterbending is actually Tai Chi. If you watch waterbenders and their movements, and you watch someone performing Tai Chi, it's the same thing. Earthbending is Hanga, which is a form of, I believe it's Southern Kung Fu. Firebending is based on Northern Shaolin Kung Fu, and airbending is based on Bagua Zhang, which is a really, really cool. It's another Kung Fu. The entire thing are all based around Chinese martial arts. But Bagua Zhang is this circular martial art. Like, everything in the martial art is built around circles, and so I love the fact that there is real world influence that makes these things work and makes these things make sense. So yeah, they go into the trainings here. I really, really like that. The next thing they talk about, they do have some safety tools in here. If you're not familiar with what that means, basically this is effectively becoming a required thing in any new RPG after I can't even remember what the game was called. There was a very, very well-known live play series where the GM did something just completely not okay, and broadcast it for the world to watch, and people watched it in real time, and it was such a huge problem what they did that I'm not going to go into details here. The game quit. The GM in question, it does not GM anymore. They used to be a huge figure in the RPG world. In general, they were everywhere. They are not in the RPG world at all. They were completely forced out of it just because of how bad this situation was and just how wrong it was what they did. So safety tools are things that are built that you can use in situations where you might be dealing with subjects that not all people are okay with. The two that they talk about here are called Lines and Veils and the X card. They are not unique to this system. They're things that have existed for a very long time, but they're very good. Lines and Veils are effectively, lines are things that if they happen in the game, you cut to black and you don't talk about them at all. And then veils are things that you can kind of talk about, but you don't want to go into complete details. Or maybe no. No, lines are, it doesn't show up. Veils are things that cut to black, where it can show up, but read the thing. It makes a lot more sense there. So lines and veils is one thing. The X card is another thing where something just comes up and somebody's just not okay with it. They can just put some people actually use physical cards with an X in it. It can be a code word or something like that, but it's just something that tells the GM, okay, this needs to stop right now. I'm not okay with this. Because of my background, for those of you that don't know, I am 100% permanent and totally disabled, and most of my disabilities are mental. I do have a degenerative hip disorder, which is not fun, and I can't get fixed for like 10 years at least. So it's just painful all the time to have hips. But most of my disabilities are mental disorders. And specifically, I have PTSD, both traditional PTSD and complex PTSD. There are certain subjects that can trigger my PTSD to cause me to have panic attacks, that can cause me to actually have flashbacks. And for me personally, that actually presents actual physical danger because I have a disorder called conversion disorder, where when I have panic attacks or when I have anxiety attacks, physical symptoms happen. The ones that my brain has decided it likes the most currently are I can have full-blown seizures, or I can get food poisoning, like the whole thing, everything, fever, nausea, throwing up, other things that we don't need to talk about. I just get full-blown food poisoning for no reason other than I had a panic attack. So things like lines and veils and the X card are very important to me, because if something like that were to happen in a game, it's not just something like I feel uncomfortable about this, which if that's what you're using it for, that's perfectly fine. This is a game. But for someone like me, it can actually present real danger. If I'm not in a safe place when we are playing and I have a seizure, and I'm not like, this is a super, you wonder why I have this super big padded chair. It's because I get seizures, and if I have a seizure and I don't have something very fluffy to bang my head against, I can cause serious damage or kill myself. Like it's a really, really big deal. So anyone that thinks that this is not something they need to do, you don't know what the people at your table are dealing with. And even if it is not as extreme as it is for me, where it can be life-threatening, mental illness and mental disorders are not something that you want to play chicken with. They're not something that it is okay to expose people to things that they are not ready to deal with. And these safety tools are essential things to make sure that people feel safe when they're playing in your games and things like that. So do not skip them. They're very, very important. That being said, you can find this section almost any new book now. Read it over. If you're not 100% familiar with how it is, Lines and Veils is an exercise developed by Ron Edwards. So if you're not 100% certain, if like it's only a couple paragraphs here that explains it, just type in Lines and Veils, Ron Edwards, or just Lines and Veils RPG into Google, and you can get a much more detailed description. Same thing is true about the X card. It was originally developed by a gentleman named John Stavropoulos. Probably pronounced their name right, but just type in the X card RPGs and it'll give you lots of stuff. It's very useful. The final the final part of this is what do you need to play, and this one of the things I find most interesting about this is how little you need to play. Unlike a lot of RPGs most people are familiar with, Avatar Legends uses a 2d6. It is a 2d6 system. Literally, all you need for all your rolls is 2d6s. Anytime you make a roll, a 7 to a 10 is considered a weak success. 11 and 12 is considered or anything above that is considered a strong success. And at most, I think you only ever add, I think the highest number you'll ever add to your rolls is 2. So this is not a super math-intensive thing. It's very, very narrative focused. And if you're not familiar with statistics, specifically, when you roll 2d6, statistically, the most common thing you will ever roll is a 7, followed closely by 8 and 6. So the three numbers you will see most often, just due to statistics, are 6, 7, and 8. Meaning, more likely than not, you're going to get a lot of weak successes when you're rolling something without a modifier. And more often than not, you're going to get a little bit more successes. Doesn't mean that you can't roll under it. I'm just saying statistically, those are the numbers you're going to roll the most. So choose accordingly. It also means strong successes are going to be relatively rare. Getting a 10, 11, or a 12 on 2d6 is significantly less likely than getting a 10, 11, or 12 on something like a d12. So understand those high end and low end numbers will not show up as much. You're going to be rolling anywhere between like 5 and 9 is generally what you're going to see the most of on your rolls. So anyway, enough about statistics. Everything else about this, like, really, you can run this entire game with just 2 dice, and then your playbooks. One of the kind of unique things about this, the playbooks are kind of meant to be actual books. Like, you take it and you mark in it. You obviously don't need that, but that's how they're designed. So really, to play this game, you really just need, each player gets their playbook, gets some dice, gets a pencil, and you're set. It's one of the easier setups I have seen to RPGs compared to something like D&D, where a lot of times at D&D you're going to need your full dice set. You may need a map and minis. You're probably going to want a GM screen. Like, this is literally get, four or five people together, give them their books, have 2 dice, and let's get going. So that is chapter 1. Moving on. Chapter 2. The World of Avatar. As I mentioned before, this is the longest chapter in the book. This is going to be the shortest chapter in this video because it's all lore, and for the most part, knowing the lore is not going to help you purchase the book. Knowing the lore is going to be very useful in playing, but I don't want to give away any of the lore. There's so much here, and if you've actually watched either of the series, you know some of this. You do not know all of this. I don't know a single person. I don't think there's a single person, even the people that wrote this, I sincerely doubt the people that wrote this knew everything in this section. It is unbelievably dense as far as just information. It's very information dense. It starts off with kind of the history of the Avatar world, before the Avatar, the creation of the Avatar, the first Avatar, Avatar 1 was the first Avatar that's talked about in The Legend of Korra, and it's an interesting idea for a start. Then it goes into the 4 nations, and this is the thing that's really cool. So it starts off with these are the 4 nations: the Water Tribes, the Earth Kingdom, the Fire Nation, and the Air Nomads. Those are the 4 groups. Did I somehow get this weird now? No, it just kind of changes things. That's weird. All right. Anyway, so each one of these things, it gives you kind of an idea of the nation. These are effectively the countries. It gives you the idea of the tribe itself. It will talk about major cities or settlements that are within these nations, and then it gives you a little bit more of like some important things to the nation. Like for the Fire Nation, the important thing that they talk about is what's called the Agni Kai. Agni Kai is a ritual duel thing. That's a huge part of Fire Nation society. It's an honor-bound thing. And so it's really, really nice they give you all of this stuff. And then they go, the next section is called A World of Balance, and then they start talking about how things change over the different eras. Specifically, they talk about technology. Like in the Kyoshi era, they talk about things like the new developments in the Kyoshi era were like a bronze single shot hand cannon made with Fire Nation explosives. That was a huge thing. Is the first appearance of effectively a flintlock blunderbuss, I guess would be the best example of that. Whereas you go to the Roku area, you have steam powered Fire Nation ships, or you go to something like the Korra era, where you have motorcycles and stun batons and the things like that. So it does kind of give you an idea of, okay, this is how the world changes over the various eras. And yeah, it just keeps going. So much detail. And then each era has its own section. It has important events that happen there that maybe your characters will interact with, maybe they won't. They have significant themes in the eras, like for the Kyoshi era, justice and revenge, betrayal and loyalty, abuse of authority, loss and abandonment, law and order, and harmony without, turmoil within. Those are the kind of big themes of that era. Where if we go further into the Roku era, the Roku era is connection versus isolation, internal conflict versus external problems, resources and industrialization, testing alliances, and propaganda and secrets. They have very, very different themes. It's going to be a different situation entirely. Which I think is really, really cool and interesting and fun. And then, like I said, in each section, they do have, like, Fire Nation during the Kyoshi era is this, and they'll have notable figures in groups, and they have a section on under each nation where it's called Threats and Challenges, which is effectively, these are your plot hooks if you want to run an adventure or even maybe a full campaign in here. Could be a one-shot adventure, could be an entire campaign. It's entirely up to you. And they do that for each of the five eras. And it's just impressive how much amazing stuff is in here. It's phenomenal. I am blown away every single time I go through this, because there's just so much here to build this incredible, complete feeling world. And then mixed throughout is just beautiful, amazing artwork, which is always fun. And that's chapter 2. Like I said, I can't really go into a ton more detail of it because it's lore. It's brilliantly written. You can read it like it's a novel. You can skip around to different places if you are building your campaign. If you're a player, you can skip around to different places to kind of figure out how you want to build your character and where you want them to come from. And it's good. That's all there is to it. Moving on. Chapter 3. Fundamentals of Play. This is something, and I've mentioned this before in when talking about other books. This is an important part of any core book for a new system. This is effectively this is how you play section. And I've seen quite a few books that are written a little bit more for established players. Their target market is to take people that already play like D&D or Pathfinder and switch them over to their game, because that is a massive market. D&D specifically is a huge market. So if you're targeting people that already know what they're doing, sometimes you will see this section put in different orders, where they will start off with, this is character building, and this is your classes, this is your races, this is your backgrounds type things. But if it's a new book, I generally tend to prefer teaches how the system works first, before you introduce classes, races, anything like that. Before you even talk about building a character, we need to understand the system so we can understand what choices are important when we're building our characters. And that's what Fundamentals of Play is. It starts off really kind of describing how this is going to work. They talk about the conversation. This game, more than other games that are narrative focused, is really built around the GM and the players having a conversation. The GM will set the scene. The players will sometimes help set the scene. Sometimes they will simply just, the GM will set it and then ask the players what they want to do. But it is a back and forth. It is very, very much, okay, this is happening. Oh, I think this should be happening too. Oh, I think this should be happening too. Everyone is contributing to this group storytelling. And they talk about things like how to frame a scene. Basically, you have these subdivisions of how the game is run. The smallest subdivision is going to be a scene. Multiple scenes make up a session. A session is just from when you sit down to when everybody gets up and leaves. An episode can be made up of a single session or multiple sessions, but it is an entire kind of short mini story. In the same way an episode of a television series would be. They frame this using the same things you would see with television series. And then you have a season, which is made up of multiple episodes. And then you have a campaign, which could be a single season or could be multiple seasons. And those are kind of the small to the big kind of separations. So they talk about how to frame a scene and kind of the stuff that you need to do to kind of get things going. They do talk about probably the most useful tool in any GM's to the toolbox, which is the phrase, what do you do? I tend to kind of change that slightly to what do you want to do? But they do put an emphasis, they have an entire section called what do you do? And they do put an emphasis on once you frame the scene, you have to get the player, okay, what are you going to do? What do you do? And they need to make decisions because this is effectively a television series you're making. Having them sit there and just ponder what they want to do for 20 minutes isn't really how things work. You see what's happening and the players do things. You know, the characters do things. Something I learned in theater back when I went to college. I majored in theater and minored in music because I didn't want to make money with either of my degrees. I eventually went back and got a degree in business marketing management, actually. So I actually did get something that's worth something, and now I can't work. So there's fun. But anyway, the whole idea behind what do you do is you tell them what's going on, and then they have to be their characters. You need to get into the mind of your character. Okay, you see all this stuff's happening. What do you do? This is the world that you have. What do you do? And I like that they put that in there. They talk about some other kind of things. One of the things I really, really enjoy about this is after they explain something, like a good one. They talk about hard scene framing. Hard scene framing is effectively the GM just kind of takes the reins and go, okay, this is what's happening next. You guys made a decision and it has moved the story forward. So instead of framing a scene where we all get to go, oh, I think this, the GM is going to frame the entire scene and then say, what do you want to do? So after they explain hard scene framing, they have an example. And I'm going to read the example because it's a really good example of how to teach new people things. So here's their example of hard scene framing. It's a bit later, after the scene with Lynn. The PCs have split up to tend their myriad of personal responsibilities. There have been a couple of lighthearted, quieter scenes so far, and the GM is looking to ramp up the tension again. They turn to Peng's player, Paxton. Peng, you're headed back to the pro bending arena to check in with your team, right? The GM asks. Yes, I want to make sure I at least show my face at practice so they don't kick me off the team, Paxton says. Excellent, says the GM. They could set a scene with Peng arriving at the training area, pawing around with teammates, having some emotional scenes or arguments, but instead, the GM decides to hard frame a scene to inject some instant tension. You come into the training room, Peng, and looking for your teammates only to see a group of black-clad, masked figures holding the limp form of your teammates. It looks like you stumbled into an abduction. What do you do? That is a perfect example of hard framing. which is something that I do in my games, where they'll be doing something and the story is going in a certain direction, and it just feels like the right time to add a kink into it, to change how the story's going, give the players a curveball, and yeah, it's a perfect example, and they do this over and over and over again. They talk about fictional positioning, and they have an example, and then they go a little more, and they have an example. It's such a good way to teach new players how to do it, and for people like me that have extensive experience running games, these examples are perfect ways for someone like me. Like I speed read. It's something I learned. I don't even know when I learned it. Sometime in college, I learned how to speed read, and now I can't help but do it. Where I can read like 2 full pages of text, I can generally read in like a minute, sometimes closer to 30 seconds. I read very, very quickly. But because of that, one of the things you do when you speed read is you learn to pick out the important bits. So you don't actually read every single word. You learn how to figure out what are the important bits and what are the things that your brain can just skip. And so these example sections are really, really great for you to just kind of speed read over something. And then when you see this big example text and it changes, the color of the text is this slight blue instead of the black that you see everything else, kind of gets your mind in, oh, maybe you want to read this fully if that last section just didn't make sense to you. So yeah, really, really good. I love this. It's amazing. Then they talk about, misses and failures and successes and stuff like that. Again, pretty simple. But then they get to what's called the core elements. And this is one of the things that makes this such an interesting system. Is the fatigues and conditions aspect of it. So most RPGs, you have hit points, and then you might have other like conditions that can somehow affect you. Like in D&D 5th edition, you have your hit points. If your hit points go to 0, you go to unconscious. There's a bunch of different conditions that will change. Like the grappled condition means your speed is 0, or the poison condition means you roll disadvantage on every thing. So it kind of modifies stuff. And then you have fatigue, which is super, super bad, and it's kind of its own little system. Those are kind of the things you have. Here, you have fatigue and conditions are effectively your quote-unquote hit points. What it is fatigue, you have a set number of fatigue. I think it's 5, but I might be wrong. But you have a set amount of fatigue. If you are in combat, because that's generally where you're going to deal with hit points or whatever their version of it is. If you're in combat, when you are getting attacked, the attacks that they use will say have them mark off 2 fatigue or have them mark off 3 fatigue, something like that. So you have up to 5 fatigue, and then you have what are called conditions. A lot of techniques used in battle will say something like have them mark off 2 fatigue or mark a condition. Conditions are heavier things. Fatigue you also use to do some of your own techniques. Like sometimes if you want to do a special attack or something, you have to mark 1 fatigue in order to do that attack. So fatigue, you can regain into the things like that. Conditions are a little bit more difficult to shake off. There are 5 conditions. They're afraid, angry, guilty, insecure, and troubled. Basically what happens is when you take damage, you generally are going to fill up your fatigue. Once your fatigue is gone, anytime you take damage, you mark a condition. You can only mark each condition once until you resolve that condition or you clear that condition. Once all 5 of your conditions are marked, you are taken out. You are effectively at 0 hit points. You don't die. Dying is, they don't technically have a system in here that kind of forces death on you. You can have characters die, but it's entirely decided upon by the narrative. There are no hard rules that say if this happens, your character is dead roll a new character. It's going to be entirely based on what the story is giving you, which I like. Some people have really strong feelings where if there's no chance to die, then there are no stakes in this. It's a very limited view on how RPGs are run, because if you watch television shows, you can get really invested in a television show or in a story or something like that, and nobody dies ever. Like, people love soap operas, and yes, there is death built into soap operas, but most of the decisions that the people make in soap operas do not have a "do this or you die" thing. Their lives are not in danger for the majority of these 40 or 50 year long TV shows. They're just story points. And sometimes it's a lot worse if instead of dying, well, you don't die, but this particular friend will never look at you this the same way, or you lose the friendship of this person, or those things can be more important than death. So, so going back to the condition fatigue thing, that's one of the more interesting aspects of this is fatigue you regain by resting, and they actually have specific rules about how you get your fatigue back. Conditions you have to clear by doing things. One of the things you can do, I mentioned before, there's a guide and comfort move where someone else can try and help you through getting rid of one of your conditions, or there are quick ways to get rid of conditions, and this is something I love. So, an example, if you have the afraid condition, you take a -2 to intimidate and call someone out moves. Those are two different moves you can do. If you try to do either an intimidate move or a call someone out move, you'll have a -2 to it. Again, you're generally never going to have more than a +2. I think you might be able to get a +3 eventually, but you're doing very small numbers. So a -2 is a big deal. So if you are afraid, you can clear that condition by running from danger or difficulty. That's one of the ways you can clear it. Now, in the midst of a game, if you have the afraid condition and you're in the middle of a fight, if you decide to clear that condition by running from danger or difficulty, that means you run from the fight and you're no longer in that scene. You've hung your friends out to dry, which can seem like a dick move, but makes for a really amazing story, because yes, you cleared that condition, you are no longer afraid, but now you have to deal with that, and it might give you a different condition. Maybe you cleared the afraid condition, but now because of that you have the guilty condition, and this is just one way you can do it. This is not how you always have to clear it. They have a huge each different condition has an entire paragraph that describes different ways you might deal with that. This is just, if you want to do it real quick, this is an easy way to get rid of it. Run away from danger. If you're guilty, make a personal sacrifice to absolve your guilt. One of my favorite ones, insecure. Take a foolhardy action without talking to your companions. Do something stupid. I love that. So they have these, okay, in a pinch, if you need to clear a condition because you're going to be taken out, you can do one of these things, or let the narrative decide how you deal with this condition. If you're guilty, maybe you have another friend that helps you get through it, or maybe you go talk to a mentor or something to deal with this. Maybe you go to talk to, effectively, you confess to someone. Maybe that's what you need to do to clear your guilt. You need to confess. It's a really interesting mechanic, and again, it kind of shows how this entire system is built around narrative storytelling. It's a really simple system for whether or not you're effectively conscious. Did you take 5 fatigue? Do you have all 5 of your conditions hit? You're out. Super simple, super easy to understand. But to deal with all these different things, you have so many different narrative ways that you can deal with them, and it's all based around the story. I love stuff like that. The other really big system in here is called balance. every character, and this is based on your playbook will actually give you your balance meter. Every character has two principles that they're torn between. To give you an example, I'm going to pull up the Adamant playbook. The Adamant, their principles are restraint versus results. To give you an idea of what the Adamant is, the Adamant will fix the world, even if it means breaking all the rules. Play the Adamant if you want to contend with what doing right means in a complicated world. So the two principles you have is restraint or results. You know, am I going to hold myself back, or am I going to do what's necessary to get the results that I want? And so every single character has a balance meter, and you start off centered, and then as you do things that relate towards one or other principle, you may have times where you have to shift your balance, and that will move. And when you move more towards one principle, you will move away from the other one, and it actually has modifiers. If you go all the way towards one principle or another, you can get anywhere from a +1 to a +3 for one principle, and at the same time, a -1 to -3 for the other principle. And there are certain times when your principle is going to be what you're rolling. So yeah, this system of balance is such an interesting thing, because a couple of the moves that you make are specifically built around living up to your principle, or shifting your balance. And you can permanently shift your balance one way or the other, so that when you are quote unquote neutral, when you wake up every morning, you don't start at zero anymore. You have shifted more towards one principle than the other. And one of the abilities that you have, that you can use, not right when you begin, you eventually have to unlock this ability, is called a moment of balance, which moment of balance is whatever encounter you are currently in. If you use your moment of balance, you have to be centered. You can't be shifted either way. You have to be centered. And when you use your moment of balance, you take over the narration. You describe how everything ends. This is, Aang going into the Avatar state, kind of the things, or Katara, like a really good example of a moment of balance for Katara would be when, slight spoilers by the way, if you've never watched the first season of Avatar, The Last Airbender, they make it to the Northern Air Temple, or one of the air temples. They go there, and eventually Aang finds the skeletons of all the monks, because the Fire Nation went and murdered all of them, and he goes ballistic. He starts shifting into the Avatar state. He starts airbending like crazy, and Katara comes over, and she just grabs his hand and kind of comforts him. That would be a moment of balance kind of situation where you take over. It's a huge thing. It can only happen once per character, or technically twice, because you can unlock it a second time with a point of growth. But it's a huge thing, and it's all based around this idea of balance. And it is what the narrative is built around, is this idea of you always are going to have these two conflicting principles that you have to come to terms with over the length of your character's story. So I love that. I think it's super, super cool. It's unique. I've never seen this. I don't believe this balance principle exists in any other Powered by the Apocalypse. I think this is something unique to Avatar, and it is such a cool system. I love it. Again, from a storytelling perspective, as an actor, one of the things that you learn to do is you learn how to examine a character and their growth. It was something that I was taught. I spent 2 years going to school for acting. And I spent a decade learning acting, but when I was in college for it was a full 2 years, and I was one of the best students in my class. That's why I dropped out to start a career in film, which went super well. But anyway, understanding how to build a character. Characters are constantly struggling between different forces that are kind of pulling on them. It's something that, because I used to play almost exclusively villains, because I was 6'1", 6'2" when I was in high school. I was a big dude. I have a very large frame, and for most of high school, I was a bit overweight. My junior year, I got in incredible shape because I did West Side Story, and we did dance rehearsals for 6 hours a day, 6 days a week. We had people lose like 60 and 70 pounds in that show. It was crazy. But anyway, I was a big guy, had a really, really deep voice, and I started shaving when I was a freshman in high school. Like, I always had like a 5 o'clock shadow. And I generally didn't shave a ton. I didn't enjoy shaving. I still don't. So I played primarily villains, and learning how to play a villain and how to kind of view the growth of the villain throughout any kind of a story is essential. And this idea of balance and principles and conflicting things is essential to creating a character. A character has to deal with their flaws. They have to deal. The interesting characters have flaws, and their story is built around how they overcome them, or they learn to accept them, or things like that. Hero, villain, whatever. And so this balance system, I think, is amazing for really teaching people how to create interesting three-dimensional characters. And then they talk about bending and how it kind of influences. Something that some people may not like, I actually really like it, is your bending is not like, you don't get a list of bending moves that you can do. There are certain techniques that are specific to bending styles or things like that. But you don't just, get a list of things that you can do with your bending. Your bending is how you interact with the world. Anytime you go around, you are going to be bending. So just walking around, you might go, I'm going to water bend some water into my pouch. Or if you're an airbender, it might be, I'm going to create an air scooter, and I'm just going to go around really, really fast to try and see this entire market, so I can know where we want to bring people. That's just what you do. Or if you're an earthbender, you're walking around, it's like, are we going to can we take a rest for like 5 minutes? Okay, I earthbend me a stool to sit on. You don't have specific moves that you do that are airbending or your weapons or whatever. That is how you interact with the world. It is an extension of yourself. And I like that. I think it's really cool. The next thing is starting a game. It talks about how to set up a game, some specifics about the team, and specific things about the characters, how they should be. And that's the chapter. So the last part kind of gets into the idea of, okay, this is how you're actually going to play the game. Most of this chapter is really, this is how the system works. And it's a really great explanation of how it works. Moving on. Chapter 4, Making Characters. This is exactly what it sounds like. It starts off with setting up your game. The same thing that they just explained. They go into a little more detail. You choose an era. Choose a scope. This is another thing I think is really interesting. Your scope is going to really define what you need for the GM and kind of the stories you're going to be telling. You could have a super broad scope, which kind of like if you look at Avatar: The Last Airbender versus Legend of Korra. Avatar: The Last Airbender has a very broad scope. They traveled around the entire world. Legend of Korra has a very narrow scope. The first season specifically is set entirely in Republic City. That's all they deal with is Republic City. It is one city in the entire world. So it specifically mentions, hey, choose your scope. Do you want to be world traveling adventurers? Do you guys want this to be something that's, set in a single nation, maybe a single city, maybe a single village that you're just trying to help out? That will really help you to kind of define what the expectations and where the story is going to go. And then you choose a group focus, basically the reason that your group is together. And again, it's kind of generally supposed to be broad. They give you some ideas. So like to defeat, insert dangerous foe, or to protect, place, idea, culture, person, thing. Things like that. And then they talk about detailing your group focus. They give you a bunch of questions that you can ask your players, or you can ask yourself to kind of define it to get a really good idea of why your players are doing what they want. Examples from Avatar. The focus of The Last Airbender of Team Aang was to stop the Fire Lord. Like it was to master, to get Avatar Aang to master R4 bending so he could stop Fire Lord Ozai. That was their group focus. If you look at Legend of Korra, the group focus kind of changes over seasons. But again, going with the first season, Korra and Bolin, and I can't remember the other ones' names now. I feel real dumb. But anyway, that whole group, Asami is one of them. That whole group, their focus was to protect Republic City. That's what they did. So those are kind of ideas for detailing your group focus. And then they talk about the inciting incident, which is basically what brings everyone together. This is another section that's really, really great, even if you don't plan on running an Avatar game. Just read this. It's a page. Technically, it's half a page because the other half is an example. But this is a really, really good introduction to how you can create an inciting incident that starts a group together, that starts specific adventures within a campaign, starts an entire campaign. Understanding an inciting incident is really, really important. Yeah. Next, You're the Hero talks specifically about the playbooks. There's a grand total of 10 playbooks in the core book. Because of stretch goals, there's a bunch more playbooks. I believe Wang Shitong adds 1, 2, 3, 4. Wang Shitong's the one expansion they get adds 4 more playbooks. The playbooks are in the core book are the Adamant, the Bold, the Guardian, the Hammer, the Icon, the Idealist, the Pillar, the Prodigy, the Rogue, and the Successor. If they sound very generic, they are. That's done on purpose. Again, this whole system is about you creating your own character that gets to tell their own story in the world of Avatar. And so the playbooks are going to help define what your story, what the theme of your story is. We talked about the Adamant. The Adamant will fix the world, even if it means breaking all the rules. Play the Adamant if you want to contend with what doing right means in a complicated world. Whereas something like the Guardian defends someone close to them, steadfast and watchful. Play the Guardian if you want to be the first to see danger coming and the last line of defense. So depending, like, your playbook is not so much your quote-unquote class, as far as this is your group of abilities, though it does kind of fill that role. The more important aspect of your playbook is this is the story you want to tell. And this is where you want to fit in that story. You cannot have multiple people playing the same playbook, which again, I don't have a problem with. There's 10 different playbooks. A lot of times you're going to have anywhere between about 3 to 5 people. So there's double the amount of playbooks just in this book as there are possible people. And once you pick your playbook, and you do you do things like you get your concept, you name your character, and all that sort of stuff. You also get to pick your training and fighting style. Training is, again, waterbending, earthbending, firebending, airbending, weapons, and technology. That's your broader thing. Your fighting style is your kind of subset of that. To give an example, and this is something I really, really like about this. So if you wanted to call your training kind of your class-ish thing, your fighting style might be your subclass. So to give an example, for airbending, one of the fighting style suggestions they have is defying gravity as your fighting style. Running up walls, never touching the ground on a cushion of air. That is what your fighting style is you're always just kind of doing things that break gravity. Another example for technology, throwable bomb pellets. If you want to be the person that's always throwing, bombs and explosions and things like that, that's what they kind of mean is your training is going to be kind of how you do things. Your fighting style is going to be what you do. And they have suggestions in here. But the cool thing about the fighting styles is there isn't a set list of fighting styles. Like in D&D, if you're talking class and subclasses, there's a specific number of subclasses. You have to pick a subclass that already exists. You can create your own fighting style. It is flavor. Fighting style is the flavor. It is an important flavor. It's not something that you can skip out on, but it is still a flavor that is designed to help kind of fill out your character. And then after that, you choose your background. This is something where they do give specifics. They let you choose up to 2. There's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, there's 6 backgrounds. They have military, monastic, outlaw, privileged, urban, wilderness. And again, these are meant to be very, very generic, so you can create your own character using these as kind of guideposts. And again, for the background, again, it's mostly just another tool that's going to be used to help you create a more realistic, interesting character. And then they have a few other things. They choose your hometown, choose your demeanor, choose your look, which is basically what do you want your character to look like. And then each playbook has a section called history, where it actually has a bunch of questions that you really should answer that help you figure out things like your motivation for the character. Why does your character do what they do? They'll define NPCs that are important to your character. They'll define an object or a symbol that's important to your character, and the final question will actually give you a connection to the rest of the group. And then after you do all that, they get into mechanics. They talk about the stats and how you can add numbers to certain things to kind of focus on the things that you do best. There are 4 quote-unquote stats in this book. They are creativity, focus, harmony, and passion. Whenever you are making rolls, you are going to use either one of those 4 stats, or you will roll one of your principles, which you've already talked about, that balance system. So that's what you do. You're going to be adding your creativity or your focus or your harmony or one of your principles to your rolls to see if you succeed or fail. Yeah, and then they talk about the fatigue, the conditions, the balance. They do mention the moment of balance here. And then they start talking about the playbook moves. Your playbook itself will have a bunch of different moves listed in your playbooks that are either unique to the playbook or kind of connected to the playbook in some way. When you build your character, you get to choose 2 of those that you know. And then they have combat techniques, because combat is a part. If you've ever watched the show, combat's a big part of the show. They have combat techniques, and they have different levels that you kind of learn. You every combat technique you learn, you have 3 levels that you know. You have a learned technique, a practice technique, or a mastered technique. A learned technique, if you're using it in combat, actually costs you fatigue in order to use it. However, as soon as you successfully use a learned technique in combat, it becomes practiced, and it's much easier for you to use. If in order to go from practice to mastered, you have to do something narratively to earn that mastered thing, which will be a conversation you have between you and the GM. And master techniques are even easier for use to use. Some, depending on how high you roll, it might mean you can use 2 techniques if one of them is a master technique or things like that. Like there's huge benefits to being mastered. And you start off, depending on whether this is a single session or a campaign, you start off with either a single mastered technique, or if it's just a single game session, it's a one shot. Or if you are creating a character for a full campaign, you start with one master technique and one learned technique. And then as you go on, one of the things you can choose for growth is learning a new technique. And then, yeah. And then the final thing, they talk about growth questions, introducing your character, and finally bringing the cast together. They talk about connections, which is really useful. Again, this whole section, even if you're not going to run Avatar, there's a lot in here that's really, really useful if you want to get better at building campaigns, giving players something that I've seen complaints about online quite a bit on like Reddit and the things like that is, well, how do I bring the group together? Creating that inciting incident is so hard, or giving them a reason to work together, or, you know, my players keep saying, why would my character do this? This gives you really, really good ways to introduce connections and the things like that that will make it so your players' characters actually want to adventure together. They want to interact with that. So even if you're not going to ever run this system, this is a great place where you can kind of read and get an idea on how to just build any RPG campaign. Like, these are universal truths. The final little kind of addendum is they talk about, there's a specific little side section called, can I play a canon character? Basically, well, I want to play Katara. And they talk about, specifically, the game system itself is not really meant for you to play canon characters. Their story that you would explore in this has already been explored. The journey that they take from someone that's unsure of themselves to someone that has fully understood themselves and come to the balance of their character happens in the television shows. However, they do say, well, if you're interested in doing them, yeah, we do give examples of, you know, if you wanted, you know, the adamant is similar to these characters that already exist in it. So if you wanted to play an established character and you just wanted to tell your own stories, you know, you want to make your own effectively Avatar fan fiction, you can, and this gives you the systems to do that. The only thing they mention is being the Avatar themselves. The system itself is not really designed for you to be the Avatar. The Avatar is significantly more powerful than any other character in the game. The Avatar can fight entire nations by themselves. So that's the only thing they do is like, well, maybe you shouldn't be the Avatar. There are no rules in the game that would allow you to be an Avatar-like character. All the rules in the game are built around you not being the Avatar, because there's only one Avatar in the entire world at any given point in time, whereas there are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of other people that you could be. So in a game, if one of you is the Avatar, only one of you could be the Avatar, and everyone else would feel really, really useless compared to the Avatar. So I think that's really interesting that they put that little thing in there. By the way, if you want to play canon characters, do your own fanfiction, that's perfectly fine. However, if you want to play the Avatar, we don't have rules for that. You would have to work with the GM to create something really interesting to tell an Avatar, The Last Airbender style story or something like that. It might even be better if the GM played the Avatar and the rest of you guys were there to kind of help them on their journey. So, cool, interesting stuff. Moving on. I can get rid of that one. All right, Chapter 5, Core Moves. These talk about the specific moves that you're effectively able to use. They talk about basic moves, which are things that everyone can use. And again, this entire system is based around moves. You are telling a story, and when you get to a situation where there is uncertainty, is how they describe it. If there's a situation where you might succeed, you might fail, that's when a move comes in. And moves can kind of go two different ways. Again, they put a huge emphasis on this is very narrative focused. So you shouldn't be sitting there and going, well, I'm going to guide and comfort. So I'll roll my harmony and I'll guide and comfort. No, you need to explain, okay, what are you going to do? And then that's a guide and comfort, so we will use that. The moves are meant to explain how to do the narrative you want to do. They're not like moves in a fighting game where it's like, well, I'm going to use my Hadoken or my Shoryuken against this, and then I'm going to finish it off with a Tatsumaki Senpai. They're not like that. They are kind of descriptions of narrative things that are going on that give you rules on how to resolve an uncertain narrative. The basic moves, I'm not going to go through all of them, but I've mentioned a few of them. Things like Intimidate is a move. But in a situation, like to give you a good example, here's one of the example sections. And like I said, they have this littered everywhere. And I love how well this works. This gives you a perfect idea of how these moves are used and how the system works. Quartz the Guardian wants to get into the Spirit Shrine, but it's guarded by Fire Nation soldiers. Quinn, Quartz's player, describes Corpse stomping up to the guards. I'm getting close, and I'm telling them I'm an undercover Fire Nation operative. I'm doing my best to look all impressive and cow them into letting me through. Is that an intimidation? No, I don't think so, says the GM. It's more of a trick. It depends upon them believing you're an undercover Fire Nation operative, right? Ah, I get it, says Quinn. Okay, well, I still want to say that, but it's pure pretense. I don't care if they bite or not. I just stand there glaring at them, flexing my muscles, picking at scars. The GM considers, in another situation, to not be quite enough to intimidate, just to stare and flex. But here, these are only regular guards. Perfect. That's an intimidate. Roll. Quinn rolls and gets a 12. I kind of want to say that they can't run and get back up, but then I think I'm more worried about them attacking me and slowing me down, so I pick that. They can't attack me. Great, says the GM. They look at each other, and it's clear they both don't want to fight. Yes, sir, says one. Feel free to make your way inside. As soon as you do, you look behind you and see they've run off, presumably to go get help. What do you do? So that's how these things work, is you describe and go, this is the thing I want to do. This is what I'm describing. Is that an intimidate? And then the GM will go, well, no, I think that is trick. Trick is another move. If you're wondering where that thing is, so to explain the intimidate move, when you intimidate an NPC into backing off or giving in, roll with passion. Again, one of the 4 stats, passion is one of them. On a hit, they choose 1. On a 10 plus, first you pick one they cannot choose. So the way this works is on a hit, they get to choose, but if you get 10 plus on a hit, which is effectively a critical, I guess would be the best thing, you get to choose one that they're not allowed to use, and they have 5 different things they can choose, or 4 different things they can choose. They can run to escape or get back up. They can back down but keep watch. They give in with a few stipulations. They attack you but off balance. The GM marks a condition on them. So those are the 4 different things that can happen when you intimidate and you succeed. So what happened here, she rolled a 12. And she specifically goes, I'm thinking about I don't want them to go get back up, but I'm actually more worried about them trying to attack me because that would slow us down. So I'm going to say that they cannot attack me. So one of the options is they attack you but off balance. And because Quinn got a 12, they say, well, I'm going to say that they can't attack me. So they can choose any of the other 3, but they can't attack me. And so they run, the first one, they run to escape or get back up. And the GM chooses for them because the GM is playing the NPCs. That's how moves work. And like I said, this is such a great way to teach them because, again, compared to your more standard RPG, I'm always going to relate things to Dungeons & Dragons because it is the most popular RPG by miles. Compared to D&D, where you have, these are my abilities, I just pick them and use, this is a very different system. And this example system that they use works so well to give you really concrete examples of how this is going to work. So yeah, there's quite a few different. There's actually not a ton. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think there's a total of 6 basic moves. Oh wait, no, there's more than that. 7, 8. So there's 8 basic moves, and again, they're generalized. So you just kind of explain what you're doing, and then you fit a move in there. And then you have what are called balance moves. These are the ones that actually use your balance instead of one of those techniques. They're things like live up to your principle or call someone out. And then you have deny, call them out, or resist shifting your balance. And then lose your balance. So these are the big things that are going to be huge character moments for you. And they use your balance instead of one of your attributes. And like I said, the whole system is just really, really interesting, fun, very, very narrative focused, which I like. Definitely encourages players to think more about their describing a movie instead of I'm going to move 6 feet, I'm going to move 20 feet, and then I'm going to use my attack action. This is more about, I run over to this person, I leap over to the table, and then I form a fire dagger, and I use that to cut one of the ropes. It's very, very narrative focused. And then the next thing they talk about is advancement, basically how you quote unquote level up. There aren't any levels in this. You just get growth points. Balance moves can give you growth points, so that's one of the reasons why they're so important. Is in certain situations, succeeding on a balance move actually can give you a growth point, which will get you other cool stuff. Or just by at the end of each session, you ask your growth questions. There are 3 growth questions. Did you learn something challenging, exciting, or complicated about the world? Did you stop a dangerous threat or solve a community problem? And did you guide a companion towards balance or end the session at your center? And there are also growth questions that are built into your playbook. If you answer yes, you get a growth point, and you get to move on. And then they do have an entire section on building custom moves, which again I'm not going to get into, but it's a really, really good thing on, if your players want to do something. Like the example they given here is related to Pai Shao. If you're really good at Pai Shao for whatever reason, one of the moves, one of the custom moves they make is when you play an opponent in Pai Shao, roll with focus. On a 10 plus, you win handily. On a 7 to 9, it's a close game, but you win. Mark a condition. On a miss, you lose. So those are the kind of custom moves, and it's really, really great, simple way to kind of understand how the different moves into the things like that work. And then they talk about combat exchanges. So moves are kind of narrative, and they're one player does something and they use a move, and it moves the narrative forward. Combat exchanges are two groups going at it. So combat exchanges are going to be adversarial, always. And they talk about the combat system in this is really, really interesting, because the way that it works is combat, you don't have initiative in this like you would have most. What happens is there are 3 different approaches that you can go in combat specifically. And what happens is the 3 approaches you have are defend and maneuver, advance and attack, and evade and observe. Each one of those approaches has a different group of basic techniques you can use, and your playbook will have techniques that fit into each one of these things. What happens is when an exchange round begins, the DM, before the players do anything, the DM in secret will choose approaches for each of the NPCs, and he kind of locks them in. Then the players choose their approaches. Then everyone reveals what the approaches are, and they resolve each maneuver based on what approaches you choose. You always start with defend and maneuver, then attack and advance, and then evade and observe. And the interesting the thing about these is in an exchange, everybody gets to do there are in a single round. Everybody gets to use whatever move they decide to do. Like everything happens in a round. You don't get to like in initiative. If you take someone out before their turn comes, they lose their turn. This is every round of combat is everyone kind of interacting at the same time. And at the end, if you're taken out or whatever happens, that happens after everyone has done their things. So you choose your approach. You don't have to choose the move you want to use, the technique that you want to use. You just choose your approach. Then they resolve all defend and maneuvers first. Then all advance and attack go next, and then all evade and observe go after that. So if something happens that would influence another thing, like there are certain techniques you can use that can prevent an enemy from doing a certain thing or using a certain approach in the next thing. So, and then if there's still people on both sides, you go to another exchange, and it goes back into you choose your approach. Once everyone has figured out once everyone has revealed which approaches they're used, then everyone gets to choose the technique that they're going to use, and they resolve them. And and they talk about this different statuses. They have positive and negative statuses. Things like doomed is a negative status, while empowered is a positive status, and it helps you in a lot of different things. And then it talks about the basic techniques. So again, each one of these techniques is going to be a thing is like, I'm going to do this. And this is a little bit more of you choose the maneuver, and then you choose the actual technique, and then kind of narrate it, compared to like the moves where you kind of explain what you're doing, and then you find a move that kind of fits with that. You can do that, but it's a little bit more awkward, I guess, is what it is. And yeah, like it's pretty simple and easy, and yeah, it's impressive just how simple and open this system is, and just how little of the system itself there is, and it still makes perfect sense. So yeah, then they have a really long kind of example where they give basically an entire exchange that I really like. He gives you a perfect idea of how combat is meant to run, and it's just great. So yeah, that is chapter 5. Moving on. Chapter 6, the Playbooks. These are your playbooks. Again, calling them your class, like, you don't really have a class race background combination in this. Your playbooks are kind of the story that you want to tell. Your training and fighting style are going to be kind of how you flavor that telling. So how you do it is your training and your fighting style. The story that you're telling is based on your playbook. And to be perfectly honest, the best way to describe it is to describe it as these are your playbooks. Like, it's really hard to relate it to another system other than Powered by the Apocalypse, because that's how the system was created. It's a very unique system, and it works really well for what it's designed to do, which is to tell interesting stories. So yeah, like I said, there are 10 playbooks in here. I'm not going to go through every single one of them. But they all have, again, they will all have things like your starting stats. Your playbook will define your starting stats. Like for the Adamant, your starting stats are creativity 0, focus +1, harmony -1, passion +1. Your principles will be defined in there. Again, for the adamant, it's restraint versus results. They will have moves that you can use. They have a featured move that is just part of you. Just because of this playbook, you have this specific move that is completely unique to the playbook, and you just get to use it. Or it's a technique. Sorry, it's a featured technique. So your playbook has a specific technique that you can use in combat exchange, and then you'll have your growth questions. And yeah, I mean, it's a really really great. Each one of each one of the playbooks has the same stuff in there, and they're cool and they're interesting and they're fun, and I love them. They're really really good, great. It's so different from what I personally am used to in an RPG. Because again, if you watch D&D Deep Dive, I'm used to kind of ripping apart these classes and figuring out all the choices you can make. And this is so open-ended, and this is so narrative focused that it's very, very refreshing and very, very fun for me to be able to look at all the cool stuff that you can do with this. So, yeah, I love everything about these. I don't have much more I can say about the playbooks without going crazy on them. So that is chapter 6. Again, pretty short, but it's what it is. Check it out. It's really good. Moving on, chapter 7, advancement. This goes more into the specifics of how your character can grow, how to earn growth points. They kind of defend what's the end of a session and the things like that. Talk about your growth questions, your growth advancement. So the things that you can do to advance in this. There are 5 different things that you can do. You can take a new move from your playbook. And again, each one of these things you can do twice before you're maxed out. You can take a new move from another playbook. So that's the other thing that's kind of cool, is you can kind of mix and match moves from other playbooks to create a kind of unique, interesting character. You can raise a stat by +1 to a maximum of +2 in any given stat. You can't have higher than a +2. You can shift your center 1 step, so that when you are quote-unquote centered, well, that may mean that you are slightly closer to one principle than the other, which kind of happens as you're playing your character more. You start realizing that they tend to be leaning one way more than another. And you can shift your center 1 step, goes any way you want. So you can shift your center back to center. You can shift it away from center. And then the final thing, you can unlock your moment of balance, which I mentioned before. Your moment of balance is your big, episode ending thing. You get to take control of the narrative from the GM and say exactly what it is. And again, this is something that can only happen. First of all, you have to have a growth point because you have to unlock your moment of balance. Then once you use it, that's it. You don't get another moment of balance for the rest of the game. You can unlock it twice. So you unlock your moment of balance and then you use it. And then if you get another growth point, you can unlock your moment of balance again. But that's it. For your entire use of this character, it can only happen an absolute maximum of twice that you have this moment of balance. So it should be a huge moment for your character. From a narrative perspective, your moment of balance should be something that is really, really important. Probably the most important thing that happens to your character is that moment of balance. Because of that, you get complete control over it. No one else is allowed to interfere. You get to describe exactly what happens to your character. And that's something else that I really, really like. It's something that I've talked to other players about, especially new players. They will go, you know what? I really kind of, do I have to do this? Or, I really want this to happen. Or I wish this would happen to my character. I go, well, it's your character. It's your story. If that's a situation you want your character to be in, tell me, and I will put your character in that situation as soon as I can, or wherever it makes sense in this story. If that's the story you want your character to tell, then that's the way that I need to GM this. Because again, running an RPG is the GM creating a world for the players to tell their story in. And so this moment of balance is the perfect example of that, where it is so much of this is the story that my character needs to tell. This is the story they're telling, that when I use my moment of balance, I get to narrate the entire thing. The moment of balance happens exactly the way I feel it should happen. So it's something that's very, very rare. It should be in a narrative, and it's just cool. I love that idea. Yeah, it's just really, really cool. Then they talk about advanced techniques, and advanced techniques are another way that you can kind of build your character. It's not kind of built around the specific growth points. Learning advanced techniques, you actually have to find a teacher that will teach it to you. It's built into the narrative, and they're interesting stuff. And again, the techniques are, again, you have learned, practiced, mastered. Yeah, they have a whole list of the different techniques, and they have not really rules, but kind of guidelines for how to go from practiced to mastered, how to actually train the move and how to learn it, and things like that. You know, all of this is very narrative focused. They have to find someone that knows the technique, that is willing to train them in it. That could be a huge part. If you think back to something like, I think The Last Airbender does this a lot better than Korra, The Legend of Korra does. But if you look at, there was an episode where Sokka is feeling very useless compared to the rest of the team. Where you know, Aang is the Avatar, Katara is a water bender, Toph is the greatest earthbender in the world, but he didn't have anything. You know, he had a boomerang, and the rest of the group was trying to convince him, no, you're an essential part of this team, but he's like, no, I want something for me. And so he went and he found a sword master that taught him swordplay, and he became a master swordsman. And he starts off very unsure of himself, and he has to learn it, and he kind of second guesses himself a lot, and then he eventually becomes practiced with the sword, and then he becomes a master of this as a sword. And he actually gets a part of his learning as he goes to someone to actually forge a sword out of a meteorite for him. I think he calls it meteor sword throughout it, and that's a huge part of his character growth, as he finally goes from feeling like all this magic is happening around him and he is the only normal person around him, he's the only non-bender in the group, to finally going, no, I'm no longer the non-bender, I'm the swordsman. You know, this is what I do. This is what I bring to the group, is I'm the swordsman. And it's a really, really cool growth moment for Sokka. That's kind of what these training a new move can be. And again, it's a way outside of the growth track that we talked about just a second ago, that you can use to kind of let your character advance and become more powerful, is letting them train a new move. And then going from practice to mastered can be another episode and another really cool growth moment. So yeah, overall, again, it's a really, really cool thing. They talk about some specialized bending, things like blood bending or combustion bending, stuff like that. These are all things that you can learn as advanced techniques. And then they also have a section on changing your character. It may be that your character comes to the end of their story before the campaign finishes, and so your character leaves for whatever reason. It might be that your character dies. You know, that does happen in Avatar. Uncle Iroh passes away, and unfortunately, again, spoiler, sorry about that if you haven't watched a decade-old series. But you know, it may be that your character dies. It may be that your character goes off to do something else. Like a really, really good example, again, slight spoilers, is Suki joins the group for a little bit, and then Suki goes away. just due to how things are going, and new characters are introduced and characters go away. Yeah, they have in here, you may change your character for a bunch of different reasons. Um, and they give you a lot of, like, your center shifts off the edge. Effectively just means that you no longer have two different things that you're struggling with. You just go on one thing specifically, and that might mean that you need to change your character. You might just change your playbook. You play the same character, but you change your playbook because the character doesn't fit them anymore. You might create a brand new character. So yeah, it's really interesting. That's all I can really say. So that's chapter 7. Moving on. Chapter 8, Running the Game. Again, this is a great how-to guide on how to be a GM. A lot of the stuff here are just rules for running an RPG. And again, even if you're someone like me who's really experienced, this is not a bad section, because it does go into a lot of different things that help you really be a good game master. Like, this is such a great how-to guide on how to be a game master, to the point I would almost say if anyone from Magpie is watching this section might be a cool thing to release on its own, whether you release it for like $2 or something or release it for free or something. This is such a great how to be a GM guide. It's one of the better ones that I've ever read. This is something that even if you didn't want to buy this entire book, this is such a good section. So, and yeah, it talks about how to be a game master. I'm not going to go through every thing in here, but it's really good. Some of the things are a little bit more generalized towards Avatar. Like, one of the things they talk about is emphasize lessons throughout. Avatar Legends, the role-playing game, shines when players deal with coming-of-age stories. This is something that's not 100% unique to Avatar Legends, but this is something that Avatar Legends does really well. D&D may not be great for coming-of-age stories all the time. D&D is a little bit more about, big fantasy, saving the world style stuff. It's not really built for interpersonal conflict and personal growth and things like that. Doesn't mean that can't happen. It does happen quite often in D&D campaigns. If you've watched any of Critical Role's campaigns, there's beautiful character growth in them. However, this is something that Avatar Legends excels at. So, and then one of my favorite sections, seek consequences besides death. This is something I have to kind of beat into a lot of Dungeon Masters, specifically in D&D. And it's one of the reasons why higher level D&D is not played as much, is because everyone thinks the lose condition for combat has to be everybody dies. That is the only lose condition that can ever exist, and if that isn't the lose condition, then you haven't built the combat correctly. No. First of all, higher level D&D, no matter what edition you're playing, characters are really hard to kill. They are. They're super hard to kill. It is remarkable how difficult it is to kill characters. My first DMing experience was in 4th edition. In 4th edition, when you get to Epic Tier, I think it's level 23, you get a Get Out of Death free card. Every single Epic Destiny gets an ability at somewhere between level 21 and 23, I can't remember, where when you are reduced to 0 hit points, you get to come back for some reason. One of my favorites was your Epic Destiny is you are, in the future, you are a legendary hero. And what happens is, in order to live up to that legendary status, if you're reduced to 0 hit points, your future self goes back in time and replaces you for a little bit for you, and fights for you so that you can live long enough to become the legend you will eventually become. That is one of the Epic Destinies you can pick. And you can do that once a day. So seek consequences besides death. I've already mentioned before, death is a really simple, easy thing to deal with. And I realize that sounds super crass. But remarkably enough, for the character that is experiencing it, death is really simple. You're done, you're over. But having to live with the consequences of what has happened if you lose, that is incredibly difficult. You're going up against a lich, and dying is pretty simple. Okay, well, he won, I lose, let's start a new thing. However, going up against a lich and becoming undead, and now, or going up against a lich and one of your allies becoming undead, and now you have to come to terms with the fact that someone that you've adventured with your entire adventuring life is now a bad guy, and they're going to do horrible things unless you have to stop them. That is a much, much, much worse fate than death, and it's a much more interesting story to tell. Again, death is so boring in RPGs. Seek consequences beside death. It is a beautiful thing. Every single person that decides to run any RPG ever needs to read that section. Then it has a thing about GM moves, specific things that the GM can do. And this is very much just for Avatar Legends, and it's a really good section that really helps you to kind of keep the story going and keep things exciting for the players. As a GM, especially in a narrative game like this, you cannot just sit back and let the players tell the story themselves. First of all, it's not fun for them if they're the only ones putting anything into this story. And second of all, the players, for the most part, most players are not going to make bad things happen to their characters on purpose. And if they are going to make a bad thing happen to their character, it's going to be because they want to do something good later on. They are not going to challenge their own characters. That is your job. Your job is to challenge your characters, not to kill them, not to attack them, challenge their characters. You need to present challenges for their characters to overcome so their characters can grow and change. And this whole section deals with that. Then it has a whole section on NPCs. Again, this is really focused on NPCs in Avatar Legends, but a lot of the stuff in here is pretty general stuff too, that you could use in other systems. Then it has tips on how to portray NPCs. This is much more, again, there is still stuff about Avatar Legend in here, but this is another thing that's really, really useful, especially if you are not super comfortable portraying NPCs, whether or not you want to fully roleplay them out or just kind of describe their actions. It's a really nice section to look at for that. And they have a specific section on how to manage bending and training and stuff like that, how to run fight scenes and things like that. And they have a beautiful, another extended combat example that lasts for a couple pages to give you a really, really good idea of how that's supposed to look, which I love. Moving on, Chapter 9, Seasons and Campaigns. So this is your kind of basics of how to run an actual campaign, sessions, things like that. Talks about materials and prep and all that stuff. Selecting your era, you're setting the tone, your sessions and all of that. But after it talks about kind of the basics of, this is how you run a game as a GM, starts talking about crafting a season. Talks about, your focus and scope, the episodic structure. Again, if you've ever actually studied screenwriting, or really just actual study into the actual mechanics of writing, like actual done study into writing, this stuff will feel very, very familiar to you, and it's really, really useful if you never have to read this section, because it does give you an idea about how to tell stories, and different structures that you can use to tell those stories, which I really, really like. There's a section on character arcs, how to create threats. Threats for a single episode are going to be different than threats for an entire season. And then they talk about pacing, your finale, escalation, paths to resolution. Like, this whole thing is built for Avatar Legends, but You can use these techniques in literally any RPG you ever want to run. That's what's so amazing about a lot of these sections is, yes, they're made for Avatar and they work really well for it. But if you understand a little bit of the templating, you can look at this and go, wow, I can use these in my own D&D games or my own Cypher games or whatever. That's one of the beautiful things about this book is so much of this book can be used in other systems and other games, and it's just as useful there. Then they talk about new seasons. So the idea of a campaign might be a single season, might be multiple seasons. And so they talk about, the idea of, well, if you're going to be using the same characters in a new season, this might be how they do it. So that's chapter 9. Moving on. Definitely my longest one yet. Chapter 10, Running Adventures. And again, this is a 2-part section. The first half of it talks about how to actually run an adventure. And again, most RPG core books that I've read, running adventures section is like a page and a half of, oh, this is how to run an adventure, and then an adventure. And it really isn't that useful for most new GMs are going to feel very overwhelmed in a lot of these things. This, however, is an actual how to run an adventure section. Like it actually talks about creating adventures, center your adventure. What's the places, what's the central location, identifying the central conflict. Example prep for PC in action. What happens if the players aren't doing anything? How can you get them going? How to outline your main characters, your central NPCs, your general NPCs, adventure tools, things that you can use to make things more interesting, escalations, a clock. The example adventure I ran in the quick start. They actually had a clock aspect to it, and the clock aspect was really, really fun and interesting because it let the players know, listen, this is what's going to happen, and you can decide to do whatever you want, but the clock is going to keep ticking. And this particular clock was not actually, okay, you have an hour to do this. It was, your characters have a day. Every time they do something, time is going to pass, and at certain instances, another portion of this clock is filled. It had 4 sections. Basically, you had morning, afternoon, evening, and night. And when it got to night, the adventure was over. If they hadn't, in that particular adventure, they had to escape from a city. If they hadn't escaped from the city, they were caught, and they had a big climactic fight that they had to deal with then. That they were in a bad situation. Like it was not stacked in their favor if they got caught at the end before they could escape this city. So they have clock, they have flashbacks that you can use as a tool, special circumstances, an anchor NPC. And then they have an section on adventure hooks, specifically for the Avatar Legends. This you really can't use for any other system, but maybe you can if you're really creative. But they have Kyoshi era adventure hooks. Roku era, 100-Year War era, Aang era, Korra era adventure hooks. So if you wanted to come up with a hook for, you could do a single adventure. Some of these work for entire seasons, maybe full campaigns. You can get as big or as small as you will want with them. And then the second half of this is an adventure called The Vanishing Act, which is cool. And they have a specific section here called No Path to the End. Adventures in Avatar Legends, at least the pre-printed ones I have read, this one and the Quick Start one, are not like I used to run the Adventures League stuff for D&D 5th edition. I was a local coordinator for a while. And those adventures are very, very specific. They will tell you, okay, this happens first, this happens second, this happens the third. And no matter what the players do, you will eventually get to the end of the adventure, and you have a specific path that you do it. Some people consider them a little bit railroady. I tend to like them for new GMs because they give you everything you need to move the story forward, and sometimes that can be very, very difficult for new GMs. The adventures that the pre-printed ones that I have read, are not nearly that detailed. Generally, what they do, they will give you a summary of the adventure. They will give you kind of, the thing that you're going to deal with. And then they will give you kind of examples of what the players might do. And they give you a world, an area to kind of do it in. And they go, however you want to do it. And then at the end, they'll go, okay, so these are the possible things that might happen in there. But they're very, very open-ended. And they're very, very dependent on what the players do. That can be a little bit overwhelming for a new GM. But there's enough hand-holding here, and there's enough guidance here that even a brand new GM can kind of step into this, and they read it a few times. They can feel very, very comfortable running this adventure without too much difficulty. Again, the adventure itself there's not a ton of text you have to read through. They'll have bullet points to go, hey, these are the things that are happening. Here's things that could escalate. And then, here's the different characters that you might deal with. Here are the important locations. Here's, and then they have a whole section on GM advice where they kind of give you some more guidance about, okay, how would this kind of work? Ways that you could set this adventure in different eras. And then, yeah, that's the whole section. Again, it's a nice introductory adventure. I think I like this. The quick start adventure is really, really nice, and I've run it, and it's a really, really great adventure. This one is really nice too. I think I like the quick start adventure a little bit better because it's a little bit more limited. It's a little bit more directional because of the clock aspect of it. For a brand new GM, it's a little bit easier. Not by much, but just a tiny bit easier. This one's slightly more open-ended, and that's the only reason I like that one better. This one is still a great adventure for a brand new GM. And the fact that this one is attached to the rest of the book makes this superior because the rest of the book is so much nicer than the Quick Start Guide. There's so much in here that's great. But yeah, so that's that. That's chapter 10. Then they have a bunch of appendixes. They have Appendix A is all your different techniques. These are the different things that you can learn through training and other stuff like that. Some of them are specifically things like lava bending is one of the advanced things that you can learn, and there's specific techniques for that. They have Appendix B is NPCs. This is basically your monster manual, and again, with just how open-ended this thing is, there are 2 pages of general monsters effectively, and then they have specific characters like they have Kyoshi and Roku and General Iroh and Aang and Korra. And despite the fact that literally the quote-unquote monster manual is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pages long, and 5 of those pages are 1 character each, I still feel like you have everything you need to really kind of go ham on playing. Like the minor NPCs that they have minor NPCs, major NPCs, master NPCs, and NPC groups. They're the 4 different things. There's enough here that with this and the GM section where they kind of teach you how to build your NPCs and stuff like that, you will have no problems running entire campaigns out of this book. And building new characters is really, really simple. Like building new NPCs is really simple compared to something like, I've mentioned this before, I don't like building monsters in D&D 5th edition. I think it's overly complicated. Because action economy is so important in 5th edition, creating the right balance. I have created a grand total of I think 3 or 4 monsters in D&D 5th edition. It's just not fun for me. I much prefer just taking monsters that somebody else creates and reskinning them. In this, I would have no problem creating my own NPCs and quote-unquote monsters for them to deal with. No problem. It's much more simple to create. You have a lot more freedom in order to do things, and they're simple to do, and I like that. Open Legend is another one where I've literally built monsters in the middle of running a game while I'm live streaming it. I've built them on the fly. In my Open Legend game, I've never used a pre-built monster ever. This one I would probably go a little half and half, where I would use some of the pre-builts, and then I'd also mostly make my own NPCs because they're pretty easy to do. And then Appendix C is just there's a page that says all the different basic moves and balance moves. There's a page that talks about combat exchanges. Like, it's really easy. There's a campaign creation worksheet, which I really, really love. If you print that off, you can use that to build your entire campaign, and I really, really love it's so simple and easy to use. It's upsetting that there isn't stuff like this in other systems. Like, this system is built so well, or the book itself is written so well that it gives you all the tools you need to be able to run your own adventures. You're not going to have to wait for the next hardcover adventure to come out to have something to do. This has everything to make your own stuff. Then the last one's a Game Master reference sheet, which is, again, just really useful stuff to know. This is stuff that you could put on your Game Master screen if you wanted to do. So yeah, I mean, the whole thing is great. So final thoughts. I am blown away by just how amazing this book turned out. I've been burnt by Kickstarter before. I've seen things that have been Kickstarter that I'm like, really? You needed Kickstarter to do this? And this is so much better than anything I thought I was going to get when I pledged to the Kickstarter. Like, it's such an interesting thing. There's tons of little lore in here. The system itself is really interesting and fun. Again, I am a huge fan of narrative-based games. I have a huge emphasis on narrative in the games that I play. Even my D&D games, I tend to let story trump rules constantly. But in order to do that in most systems, you have to know the system really, really well. Otherwise, you start contradicting yourself, and you start kind of breaking things in the system. This system is built around narration, and because of that, everything is kind of open-ended. You can create the exact character you want to play. You come up with a really interesting idea for a character, you can play it in here, and you don't need anything else. The playbooks themselves help you to tell stories about those characters. And they're an essential part of the character itself, but like, you can play the same playbook in 2 or 3 different campaigns and tell a completely unique story every single time. And play a very, very different character every single time. Even if you choose the exact same moves every time, the character is going to be completely unique because you can choose a different training and a different fighting style, and the whole thing feels completely different, and you're going to tell a different story. You can set it in a different era, the same era, and just put it in a different part of the world, or change your scope. There's so many different ways that you can play this and just come up with really cool, interesting things. And the world itself, I fell in love with Avatar The Last Airbender. I remember watching it live. And Avatar The Last Airbender came out when I was in high school. And in college, if I remember correctly. I have to remember now. There we go. Yeah, it started in 2005. I'm not going to tell you exactly when I graduated high school, but that was near the end of my high school career. And it ended when I was in college, and I remember watching the finale live, and it was a huge thing. And this was a cartoon on Nickelodeon. It was a cartoon on Nickelodeon, and I was a full-grown adult by the time it ended, and I watched the 4-part series finale. I remember watching it live. It was that good. And I loved the world that was created. And this was before I got into RPGs. I just love this world so much. And I wished there was a way I could be a part of it. Even had, when I was in college, we had these guys come in for one of the shows that we were doing. It's called Dead Men Walking. And one of the guys came in to play a lawyer. I played a lawyer in it too, among a couple other parts. It's an amazing show. But anyway, he came in and he was a martial artist, and I was a martial artist as well. And so we were just kind of talking about it. And he goes, "Oh, I study Hanga." And I go, "Oh my God, you're an earthbender." He's like, "Yes, I am." We both kind of bonded over this fact that we're huge Avatar fans, and Hungar is earthbending. And so, yeah, I mean, I am so happy about this book. Everything about this book is just made me extremely happy. I cannot wait to... I paid enough to get the physical everything. I cannot wait to get my physical stuff. I am salivating for when I get to see all the really cool... Like, I'm going to get a Paisho tab. I'm going to get a Paisho piece, a White Lotus Paisho piece, and I'm going to get all the different playbooks. I have physical versions of them. I got physical versions of all the books. Like, I got all the cool stuff in them in this. And I'm super, super excited that eventually I'm going to get a chance to see this physically. But even what they've got here, it has blown me away with how much work and care was put into this. If anyone at Magpie Game has actually made it to the end of this video, first of all, what are you doing with your lives? You have an RPG to release. Stop wasting your time listening to this drivel. But if you're still listening, thank you so much. You created something amazing here. But oh my word, can I see the love and effort and work that was put into this book. You guys worked so hard on this, and you should be so incredibly proud of this amazing product that you guys put out. I cannot wait to see what you guys do next with this license. For everyone else that's is still watching this, again, why are you watching me for over 2 hours talk like a moron? You guys need to, you definitely need to choose better ways to waste your time. But anyway, that's going to be all for me today. As always, again, like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon and turn notifications on. All of those are super important to this video getting seen. In the comments down below, I want to know, what is your first character going to be? Are you going to build a bender? Are you going to build a weapons dude? And what kind of stories do you want to see them get into? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that is all for me today. I'll see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.